You think you know what power looks like until a CFO looks you dead in the eye, slides an envelope with a bonus smaller than your rent, and smiles. Nothing personal, just need more energy around here. What he didn't know, the lazy hands he mocked were the only thing holding up the $88 million dream he'd been selling to the board. That night, just 4 hours later, the lights in his corner office went dark. His career ended in silence. My name is Elena Harper, and I've spent 12 years building invisible architectures that keep billion-dollar companies breathing. At 34, I was lead systems engineer at Neuralink Dynamics, a SaaS company riding high on promises of revolutionizing enterprise integration, the kind of place where stock options meant something and the coffee machines cost more than most people's cars. The quarterly performance review that December afternoon should have been routine. I'd shepherded the Athena migration project through 18 months of development hell, writing the decision engine that would orchestrate $88 million worth of data transformation. Every fail-safe, every fallback protocol, every line of exception handling bore my fingerprints. Derek Vaughan had been CFO for exactly 43 days. Harvard MBA, Goldman Sachs pedigree, the kind of executive who spoke in TED Talk soundbites and believed Excel macros qualified as technical expertise. He wore Italian suits that whispered money and smiled like a shark circling wounded prey. When he slid the envelope across the mahogany conference table, it landed with the weight of an insult. $1,500. My quarterly bonus for keeping the entire infrastructure from imploding. "Elena," he said, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled like he was about to deliver profound wisdom. "The company needs fresh energy, innovation, not maintenance of legacy systems." Legacy systems. The code I'd written 6 months ago was now legacy in his vocabulary. "The decision engine handles 40,000 transactions per second," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Without the fallback protocols, Athena would crash within minutes of deployment." He waved his hand dismissively, the gold Rolex catching the afternoon light. "That's exactly the kind of thinking holding us back. We need builders, not maintainers. People who embrace agility, not those stuck in defensive coding patterns." Defensive coding. The man had learned a new term and couldn't wait to weaponize it. "Your performance," he continued, sliding a document toward me, "lacks the dynamism we need for Operation Phoenix." Operation Phoenix. He'd renamed my project, my architecture, my logic trees, my 18 months of 70-hour weeks, rebranded with a logo that looked like clip art. "I'm redistributing your responsibilities to the new team. Riley Grant will be taking point. She brings the enthusiasm we need." Riley Grant, 26 years old, 3 years out of a coding boot camp, whose main qualifications seemed to be her ability to populate Slack channels with emoji reactions and motivational quotes. I picked up the envelope, feeling its thinness between my fingers. "When?" "Effective immediately. We'll need you to transition your knowledge over the next 2 weeks. Then we'll discuss your future options." Future options. Corporate speak for finding the exit. I stood, tucking the envelope into my laptop bag with deliberate calm. No trembling hands, no cracked voice. I'd learned long ago that rage was a luxury I couldn't afford in rooms like this. "I'll document everything," I said. "That's the spirit," Derek beamed, already pulling out his phone. "Oh, and Elena, don't take it personally. It's just business evolution." I walked back to my desk, passing the wall of awards with my name etched in lucite, the architecture diagrams I'd drawn on whiteboards now permanently installed as art pieces, the team photos where I stood in the back row, uncomfortable with recognition. At my desk, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Athena repository. 800,000 lines of code, 64,000 decision trees, the entire nervous system of an $88 million operation. And buried in the original framework agreement, a clause I'd insisted on 2 years ago when the previous CFO had tried to offshore our IP clause 4.3c. Any proprietary decision logic created by an individual contributor remained under their intellectual property control until explicitly transferred via written consent. The legal team had approved it, HR had filed it, and Derek Vaughn, in his 43 days of tenure, had never read it. I began typing, fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon, not destroying anything that would be criminal, simply organizing, categorizing, protecting intellectual property exactly as the contract specified. Every critical decision pattern, every custom algorithm, every piece of logic that kept Athena from eating itself alive, I marked them with security flags, compressed them with military-grade encryption, and pushed them to the secured IP vault that required biometric authentication from the original author. By 5:30 p.m., when the office had emptied for the company happy hour, Derek was hosting at the rooftop bar. I left one ticket in the central system. Check with primary logic owner before deployment. Then I walked out, cardboard box of personal items balanced on my hip, past Derek's corner office where he rehearsed his presentation for Monday's board meeting. His voice carrying through the glass. Athena represents the future of agile transformation. He had no idea his future had just been compressed, encrypted, and locked behind a door only I could open. The next 72 hours unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch mechanism I'd wound myself from my apartment. I reviewed every line of the decision tree logic I'd written for Athena migration. 2 years of work. Each function a small piece of my mind translated into executable instructions. The beauty of good code is that it's both transparent and opaque. Anyone can read it, but only the author truly understands the why behind each choice. Every edge case I'd anticipated, every race condition I'd prevented, every graceful degradation I'd built, they weren't just technical decisions. They were intuitions crystallized into logic. I pulled up the original DevOps framework I'd helped establish when Neuralink was still pretending to care about best practices. Section 12. Subsection 4, IP-sensitive compliance protocols. Any code flagged with proprietary markers required authenticated approval from the designated owner before production deployment. Not my rule. Legal's paranoia after a competitor tried to poach our entire codebase through a contractor. The irony was delicious. The very safeguards Derek would have called bureaucratic overhead were about to become his North Star crisis. I spent 6 hours meticulously documenting which components fell under my IP ownership. Not everything that would be obvious sabotage, just the critical synapses, the decision trees that handled conflict resolution, the recursive loops that prevented memory overflow, the timestamp synchronization that kept distributed systems from drifting into chaos. Think of it like removing random neurons from a brain. The structure remains, but the thoughts can't complete their journey. Each flagged component got wrapped in a security container, encrypted with keys tied to my biometric profile. The system would run in development, even in staging. But the moment anyone tried to push to production, it would demand authentication from the primary logic owner, me. I pushed the changes at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. When the system logs showed minimal activity, the commit message was bland. Security compliance update per framework requirements. It would blend into the noise of hundreds of daily commits. Then I filed the paperwork. Every corporate lawyer will tell you documentation is ammunition. I sent 3 emails, each technically accurate, each a breadcrumb in the trail I was laying. To the DevOps team, per security protocols, I've updated the IP flags on proprietary components before my transition. Please ensure proper authentication workflows are followed. To legal, confirming all proprietary logic has been secured per clause 4.3c ahead of my role transition. Compliance dashboard shows green. To HR, as requested, I've documented all systems and secured intellectual property per company guidelines. Transition checklist attached. Each email was CCED appropriately, time-stamped, and archived. Corporate karma works in mysterious ways, but it always requires a paper trail. The original binder, the physical documentation that nobody believed still mattered in our digital age, I handled with particular care. 76 pages of hand-drawn logic flows, API mappings, and disaster recovery procedures, the kind of documentation that takes months to create and seconds to overlook. I wrapped it in plastic, sealed it with tamper-evident tape, and placed it in my desk drawer with a note. Athena Migration Original Architecture Documentation. Property of Elena Harper per Clause 4.3c. Requires written consent for access. Then I locked the drawer and mailed the key to myself via certified mail. Date stamped, tracked, legally documented. Wednesday morning, I sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Neuralink building. Laptop open to my personal email. No hacking, no unauthorized access, just waiting for the inevitable confusion to begin. Marissa Kim, a QA engineer who'd survived 4 rounds of layoffs by being too competent to fire, was my unofficial eyes inside. We'd started on the same day 8 years ago. Suffered through the same death marches. Celebrated the same rare victories. Her first text came at 9:43 a.m. Derek just announced you're gone. Says he's promoting fresh talent. Riley's literally Googling what a decision tree is. By noon, Jenkins is throwing warnings. Deploy team says something about security flags. At 3:15 p.m., emergency stand-up. Derek saying it's just technical hiccups. You should see his face, though. I ordered another coffee, opened a new notebook, and began sketching out my next moves. Not out of vengeance, that's too emotional a word for what this was. This was architecture. I'd built the system. I'd protected it exactly as our contract specified, and now I was watching physics take its course. The IP vault I'd created wasn't a bomb. It was a mirror, reflecting back every shortcut, every dismissed concern, every moment Derek had chosen buzzwords over understanding. My phone buzzed, an automated notification from the Neuralink deployment system. Production push failed. Authentication required for protected components. Somewhere in that glass tower, Derek Vaughn was about to learn that you can't synergize your way through compiled code. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. Derek had sent the invitation company-wide with the subject line, Operation Phoenix Rising from Good to Great. The email signature included his new tagline, Chief Financial Catalyst and Transformation Leader. Marissa live-streamed it for me through her phone, hidden behind her laptop screen. I watched from my kitchen table, eating cereal while Derek unveiled his masterpiece. The presentation was pure corporate theater. Animated flames transformed into a phoenix, which morphed into the new Athena logo, a design that looked like someone had asked AI to create innovation and gotten a geometric seizure instead. Today, Derek announced, his voice echoing through the company auditorium, we stop maintaining the past and start building the future. Operation Phoenix isn't just a rebrand, it's a revolution in how we approach agility. He clicked to the next slide, a photo of Riley Grant, smiling like she'd won a game show. Leading this transformation is our new migration catalyst, Riley Grant. Her fresh perspective and boundless energy represent exactly the kind of thinking that will propel us forward. Riley stood up, waving enthusiastically. She was wearing a t-shirt that said, Deploy Happiness in Comic Sans font. We're going to revolutionize our deployment pipeline, she chirped into the microphone. Make it more intuitive, more friendly, more vibrant. Vibrant. She wanted to make enterprise data migration vibrant. Derek pulled up a timeline that would have made any engineer weep. Full production deployment in 2 weeks. We're not just meeting deadlines, we're crushing them. From my laptop, I pulled up the Neuralink Slack workspace I still had red access for another week. Standard IT oversight. The engineering channels were already spiraling. Had backend emergency Carlos Dev. Anyone know why Jenkins keeps failing on decision tree auth? Samantha QA. Getting security flag errors. Says need biometric auth. Riley Grant. Don't worry, team. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can just comment out those parts. Comment out the decision trees. Like commenting out gravity and expecting things not to fall. Infrastructure Tom DevOps. These aren't normal security flags. They're tied to the IP vault. Alex Sr. What IP vault? Tom DevOps. The one in Section 12.4 of our compliance framework, Riley Grant, is that the old documentation Derek said we're not using legacy processes anymore. I watched Riley create 17 new Trello boards, each with columns like vibes, energy, and synergy. She tagged team members randomly, assigned story points based on emoji reactions, and scheduled breakthrough sessions every 2 hours. Meanwhile, the actual engineers were discovering what I'd left behind. Every attempt to bypass the security flags triggered deeper authentication requirements. Try to fork the code, biometric check. Attempt to rebuild the logic. The system wanted cryptographic proof of ownership. Crisis mode. Lead architect to Carl. Has anyone actually seen the original documentation? Samantha QA. Elena had physical binders. Check her desk. Riley Grant. Physical-like. Paper. Who uses paper? By 3 p.m., the Jenkins build system had failed 47 consecutive times. Each failure generated an automated report. CCED to the board's Technical Oversight Committee, a protocol Derek didn't know existed because he'd never read the governance documentation. Marissa texted me photos from the office. Engineers huddled in conference rooms, whiteboards covered in desperate attempts to reverse engineer my decision trees. Riley had printed motivational posters. There are no problems, only opportunities, and fail fast, succeed faster. The QA environment was now running in circles. Test data went in, got partially processed, then hit the authentication wall. The system didn't crash that would have been merciful. Instead, it entered infinite loops, each iteration consuming more resources, like a digital Ouroboros eating its own tail. Help us please, database admin. Memory usage at 87% and climbing. Tom DevOps. Should we roll back? Riley Grant. No rollbacks. Only roll forwards. Derek says we're phoenixing. Phoenixing. She'd turned it into a verb. At 5:45 p.m., I received an email from Carl Donovan, the lead architect, not to my work email that was dead, to my personal Gmail, which he'd saved from years of after-work debugging sessions. Elena, I know what you did. It's brilliant and completely legal, but I need to find that documentation before this whole thing implodes. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Not yet. Carl was smart. Probably the only person besides me who truly understood Athena's architecture. He'd figure it out. The question was whether he'd figure it out before Derek's 2-week deadline turned into a $88 million crater. That night, Marissa sent one final update. Security found your locked desk drawer. Derek tried to force it open with a screwdriver. Facilities is now involved. It's becoming a whole thing. I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled up the deployment dashboard on my personal monitoring setup. Another thing that wasn't technically unauthorized since my credentials hadn't been revoked yet. The production environment sat empty, waiting for code that couldn't arrive without my biometric signature. Somewhere across the city, Derek Vaughn was learning that you can't pivot your way past physics, you can't synergize through encryption, and you definitely can't phoenix your way out of a contract clause you never bothered to read. Carl Donovan was the kind of architect who still kept graph paper in his desk and could calculate load balancing in his head. He'd been at Neuralink for 15 years, survived 6 CEOs, and had the rare ability to translate between executive fantasy and engineering reality. If anyone could unravel what I'd done, it would be Carl. According to Marissa, he'd spent Friday night in the office, surrounded by coffee cups and printouts, manually tracing through commit histories like an archaeologist reconstructing a civilization from pottery shards. Saturday morning at 7:23 a.m., he found it. Not the code that was encrypted beyond his reach, but the paper trail, the breadcrumbs I'd left in the system logs. Each commit message, each configuration change, each timestamp telling a story of perfectly legal, completely compliant intellectual property protection. Marissa sent me screenshots of the emergency Slack channel Carl had created. Code archaeology. Carl Donovan. Found Elena's commit history. Every change is documented, dated, and legally bulletproof. Tom DevOps. Can we reverse it? Carl Donovan, not without her biometric auth. The encryption is military grade. Database admin. What about the physical docs? Carl Donovan, locked drawer. Facilities says forcing it would violate company property policies. We need the key. The key that was currently sitting in a certified mail envelope at the post office, waiting for Monday delivery to my apartment. I'd paid extra for signature confirmation. Carl's next move was predictable. He went hunting for the contracts. Every company has that one person who actually reads the fine print. And at Neuralink, that person was Diana Morales, head of compliance. Diana was famous for once stopping a $20 million acquisition because of a missing comma in a liability clause. I couldn't see their meeting, but Marissa painted the picture through overheard conversations. Carl walking into Diana's office with a stack of papers, pointing to specific sections, his voice getting progressively quieter as the implications became clear. Diana pulled the original framework agreement, the employment contracts, the IP assignment documents, and there it was, buried in Section 4, Subsection 3, Paragraph C, the clause that made everything I'd done not just legal, but required by the company's own security protocols. Any proprietary decision logic created by an individual contributor remains under their intellectual property control until explicitly transferred via written consent. Such transfer must be documented in writing with both parties' signatures and filed with the legal department within 30 days of creation. 2 years. The logic had existed for 2 years. No transfer documents had ever been filed. Monday morning arrived like a storm system everyone could see on radar, but couldn't avoid. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Derek had promised a live demonstration of Operation Phoenix's first production deployment. At 8:15 a.m., Carl intercepted Derek in the hallway. Marissa, pretending to refill her coffee, caught the conversation. "We have a problem," Carl said, holding the framework agreement. "We don't have problems. We have opportunities," Derek replied, still high on his own rhetoric. "This opportunity involves potential breach of contract and intellectual property theft if we deploy without proper authorization." Derek's laugh was the sound of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't PowerPoint away. "Just get someone to fix it. Hire consultants if you need to." The someone is Elena Harper. The authorization has to come from her, personally, biometrically. She's no longer an employee. Doesn't matter. The IP clause survives termination. It's standard in tech contracts. Carl placed the binder on Derek's desk, the one maintenance had finally extracted from my locked drawer after finding the key in Monday's mail delivery, forwarded by my apartment building's concierge. Derek opened it to find 76 pages of hand-drawn diagrams, each one initialed EH and dated. At the bottom of the last page, I'd left a sticky note in my neatest handwriting. "If you're reading this, you're not Derek, but if you are Derek Clause 4.3c, your lawyers can explain." The color drained from Derek's face like someone had pulled a plug. He had 45 minutes before he needed to stand in front of the board and explain why his revolutionary 2-week transformation had hit a wall named Elena Harper. "Get her on the phone," he told Carl. "We've tried. No response." "Email her." "Also tried." "Then find her. Send someone to her apartment." Carl shook his head. That would be harassment of a former employee. Diana was very clear about the legal boundaries. Derek grabbed the binder, flipping through pages of logic flows he couldn't understand, authentication trees that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. Each page was another reminder that he'd fired the person holding the keys to his kingdom. There has to be another way. Carl's response was an engineer's truth, delivered without emotion. There is, write new decision logic from scratch. It took Elena 18 months the first time, with a full team. Maybe we could do it in 12. 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes until Derek's moment of triumph was scheduled to begin. Through the glass walls of his office, the board members were already gathering in the conference room, their faces expecting the revolution they'd been promised. Derek straightened his tie, picked up his laptop, and walked toward his execution. Still believing he could pivot his way out of a mathematical certainty, Diana Morales had the kind of reputation that made executives double-check their contracts before entering her office. She'd once found a loophole that saved Neuralink $12 million in acquisition costs. And another time, she'd killed a partnership deal minutes before signing because she'd spotted indemnification language that would have made us liable for the partner's existing lawsuits. At 8:50 a.m., she walked into the board conference room carrying a single manila folder. Not a good sign. Diana's bad news always came in thin folders. I wasn't there, but Carl was, sitting in the corner with his laptop, ready to provide technical testimony if needed. He later told me every detail, and Marissa filled in the gaps from the aftermath. The board had assembled 7 members, including the CEO, 2 venture partners, and 3 independent directors, with the kind of resumes that included phrases like former Treasury Deputy Secretary and architected IBM's digital transformation. Derek stood at the presentation screen, his slides already loaded. Operation Phoenix from Vision to Reality glowed in 72-point font. "Before we begin," Diana interrupted, her voice cutting through Derek's pre-meeting small talk, "there's a compliance matter that needs immediate attention." The CEO, Marcus Williams, frowned. "Can it wait until after?" "No, it directly impacts today's deployment demonstration." She opened the folder and distributed a single page to each board member. At the top, Intellectual Property Compliance Alert, Critical Risk Assessment. On Thursday, I was made aware that the Athena migration system contains proprietary decision logic created by Elena Harper, our former lead systems engineer. This logic is protected under Clause 4.3c of our Standard Framework Agreement. Derek's smile froze. "That's a minor technical detail we're addressing." "It's not minor," Diana continued. "Without written consent from Ms. Harper, deploying this code to production constitutes intellectual property theft. The potential liability ranges from breach of contract to criminal copyright infringement." One of the venture partners, someone who'd seen hundreds of startup implosions, leaned forward. "When did we become aware of this?" "I was formally notified on Saturday by our lead architect. However, the clause has been in effect since Ms. Harper created the logic 2 years ago." "And where is Ms. Harper now?" the CEO asked. "She was terminated last Thursday by Mr. Vaughn." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The second venture partner pulled up something on his tablet. "Derek, in your Friday update, you said the transition was smooth and all systems were go." "They are," Derek insisted, his voice climbing. "This is just bureaucratic overhead. We can work around—" "You can't work around intellectual property law," Diana stated. "I've consulted with outside counsel. Our options are obtain Ms. Harper's written consent, remove all her code and rebuild from scratch, or abandon the deployment." "How long would rebuilding take?" Marcus asked Carl directly, bypassing Derek entirely. Carl didn't sugarcoat it. 18 months minimum. The decision trees alone have 64,000 conditional branches. Each one handles specific edge cases in our data transformation pipeline. "And if we deploy anyway?" Diana's answer was surgical. "Ms. Harper could file for injunctive relief, stopping all operations immediately. Damages could include the full value of the Athena contract plus punitive awards. Our insurance specifically excludes IP theft claims." The senior independent director, a woman who'd served on dozen boards during various crises, asked the question that mattered. Why was Ms. Harper terminated? Derek tried to recover. Performance issues, lack of innovation, resistance to change. Carl spoke up from his corner. "She architected the entire system we're trying to deploy." "Then why?" the director started, then stopped. The picture was becoming clear. Marcus pulled up his laptop, likely looking at Thursday's termination paperwork. "It says here she was given a $1,500 severance bonus for 2 years of work on an $88 million project. We're optimizing human capital allocation," Derek stammered, "by firing the person who holds the keys to the kingdom." Diana placed another document on the table. "There's more. Ms. Harper followed every protocol perfectly. She filed security compliance updates with DevOps, notified legal of the IP protection, and documented everything with HR. She even left detailed instructions about the authentication requirements. Which were ignored, Carl added quietly. The first venture partner was doing math on his phone. The Athena contract has penalties for delayed deployment. How much? $2 million per month after the deadline, Diana answered. Which is in 3 weeks, Marcus noted. Derek pulled up a new slide, desperate to regain control. We can negotiate with Elena, offer her consulting fees. She's under no obligation to accept, Diana interrupted. And given the circumstances of her termination, she has significant leverage. The room fell silent. 7 board members stared at Derek Vaughn, their revolutionary CFO who'd promised to transform their operations with agility and synergy and energy. Marcus closed his laptop with a snap that sounded like a trap closing. Derek, step outside. We need to discuss this privately. Derek gathered his things, his hands shaking slightly. As he reached the door, the senior director called out, "And Derek, don't go far." The door closed behind him. Through the glass, Carl could see him standing in the hallway, phone in hand, probably trying to figure out how to spell catastrophic failure in buzzwords. Inside, Marcus turned to Diana. What's our real exposure here? Without Ms. Harper's cooperation project dead, contract penalties, potential lawsuits, and complete system rebuild, conservative estimate $100 million in losses. Because we fired a critical engineer to save, her salary. $200,000 annually. Carl provided. The second venture partner laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. We destroyed $100 million in value to save $200,000. The decision was made unilaterally by Mr. Vaughn, Diana clarified, protecting herself with surgical precision. Marcus looked at the empty presentation screen where Operation Phoenix should have been rising from its ashes. Instead, it was becoming clear that the only thing burning was Derek Vaughn's career. Get Elena Harper on the phone, he ordered, and someone please tell Derek his services are no longer required. The board meeting ended at 9:27 a.m. By 9:30, Derek Vaughn was being escorted to his office by security not for misconduct, but for transition assistance, the corporate euphemism for making sure you don't delete anything important while packing your Italian leather briefcase. Marissa watched from the kitchen as HR arrived with boxes, and that particular expression they wear when processing an executive termination professionally neutral with an undercurrent of satisfaction. Meanwhile, the board reconvened in emergency session. Marcus Williams had his assistant trying to reach me through every channel possible: phone, email, LinkedIn, even an attempt through my GitHub profile. I watched the notifications pile up from my laptop at the coffee shop, each more urgent than the last. At 9:42 a.m., I composed a single email, not to Marcus or the board, but to the general counsel, with CC to Diana Morales and the lead independent director. The subject line was clinical, Re-Athena migration IP authorization, legal response required. The email was 3 paragraphs of surgical precision. I acknowledge receipt of your multiple communications regarding the Athena migration decision logic created under my intellectual property rights as specified in Clause 43C of the Neuralink Framework Agreement. Any discussion of potential authorization must be conducted through legal counsel to ensure full compliance with applicable contracts and regulations. I have retained Hartman and Associates for this matter. Please direct all further communication through Sandra Hartman at the attached contact information. I am not authorized to discuss this matter directly with Neuralink representatives without legal counsel present, as advised by my attorneys given the circumstances of my recent termination. Sandra Hartman was the kind of lawyer who made corporate legal departments nervous. She specialized in intellectual property disputes and had a reputation for turning developer grievances into 8-figure settlements. I'd retained her Friday afternoon, paying the $5,000 retainer with my savings and investment in what was about to come. Within 10 minutes of my email, Neuralink's general counsel was on the phone with Sandra. Within 20 minutes, emergency board conversations were happening about settlement ranges. The math was brutal: pay Elena or lose everything. Carl later told me that the technical team spent those hours in a strange limbo, Riley Grant kept trying to organize solution sprints and pivot sessions, not understanding that you can't brainstorm your way past encrypted code. She'd created a Miro board titled Phoenix Rising Alternative Pathways, with sticky notes suggesting things like blockchain integration and AI-powered workarounds. The senior engineers just stared at their screens, watching the deployment pipeline's infinite failure loop like a digital heart monitor flatlining in slow motion. At 11 a.m., HR sent out a company-wide email. We announce that Derek Vaughn has departed Neuralink to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. Marcus Williams will assume CFO responsibilities while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. 43 days. That's how long Derek's revolutionary leadership had lasted. By noon, Sandra had received Neuralink's initial offer $50,000 for full IP transfer and authorization. She actually laughed on our phone call. "They're insulting us. I told them to add a zero and try again." "What's our position?" I asked. "You hold all the cards. They have 3 weeks until contract penalties kick in. $2 million a month in penalties, plus potential loss of the entire contract if they can't deliver. The $88 million deal could evaporate. Meanwhile, you followed every protocol, documented everything, and they fired you with a bonus that wouldn't cover a studio apartment's rent." "I don't want to destroy the company," I said. "I still have friends there." "You're not destroying anything. You're being compensated for intellectual property that they need and you legally own. This is business." At 2:15 p.m., the offer came back $250,000. Sandra countered, $1 million, plus letter of recommendation, plus agreement that Ms. Harper's termination was without cause. The general counsel's response was predictable. "That's extortion." Sandra's reply was art. "It's market value for 18 months of work that's preventing a $100 million loss. We can also wait 3 weeks and let the contract penalties speak for themselves." The board met again at 3 p.m. The venture partners were doing math on whiteboards, not technical math, but the kind that determines whether a company survives or becomes a case study in business schools. Cost of paying Elena: $1 million. Cost of not paying Elena minimum $40 million in penalties and rebuild costs. Potentially total contract loss. Cost of Derek's decision to fire Elena immeasurable. At 4:37 p.m., they capitulated. Not just the money, but everything the recommendation letter stating I'd been instrumental in Athena's architecture, the termination reclassified as mutual separation with full benefits extension, and a consulting agreement at $500 per hour if they needed future assistance. But I wasn't done. There was one more term Sandra added at my instruction. "Ms. Harper requires a written apology from the board acknowledging the circumstances of her termination were inappropriate and that her contributions were undervalued." It wasn't about ego. It was about the paper trail, the corporate record that would follow Derek Vaughn forever, that he'd nearly destroyed an $88 million project because he couldn't recognize the difference between innovation and demolition. At 5:43 p.m., I received the DocuSign link, 7 board signatures, including Marcus Williams with a personal note. "Elena, we apologize for this situation and recognize your invaluable contributions to Neuralink's success." I signed at 5:51 p.m. At 5:52 p.m., I authenticated into the Neuralink system one last time, removed the IP locks, and authorized the deployment pipeline. At 6 p.m., Athena migration went live. No fanfare, no Phoenix Rising, just clean code executing exactly as I designed it 18 months ago. Derek Vaughn's LinkedIn profile was updated at 6:15 p.m. Seeking new opportunities in transformational leadership. His 43 days at Neuralink had ended exactly as I'd architected, not with revenge, but with mathematics. The wire transfer hit my account at 9:07 a.m. Tuesday morning, $1 million, minus Sandra's 30% contingency fee. $700,000 for 18 months of work that Derek Vaughn had dismissed as lacking energy. I sat in my apartment, laptop open to the deployment dashboard, watching Athena Migration process its first production transactions. The decision trees executed flawlessly, each branch following the logic I'd carved out during countless late nights. The system breathed with a rhythm I knew better than my own heartbeat. Marissa called at 9:30. "You need to see Slack." I pulled up the workspace my read access would expire at midnight, one last window into the collapse I'd orchestrated. The all-hands channel was a eulogy in real time. Marcus Williams, CEO team. I want to address yesterday's events directly. We failed one of our best engineers and nearly destroyed a critical project through poor leadership decisions. This will not happen again. Chaos. Carl Donovan. For those asking, Athena deployment is now stable. All systems green. Random developer. Wait, Elena fixed it after we fired her. Chaos. Carl Donovan. She maintained her professional obligations despite how she was treated. We should all take note. Riley Grant had gone silent. Her last message, posted at 6 a.m., was telling, taking some time to reflect on recent learnings. The venture partners had scheduled an emergency audit of all termination decisions made in the last quarter. Diana Morales was now reviewing every executive action that could impact intellectual property. The company that had let Derek run wild for 43 days was suddenly very interested in documentation and process. But the real satisfaction came from an unexpected source. At 10:15 a.m., I received a LinkedIn message from someone I'd never met, Sarah Chen, VP of Engineering at Tessier Systems, one of Neuralink's competitors. "Elena, I've been following the Athena situation through industry contacts. Your handling of the IP protection was masterful. We're looking for a chief architect, interested in a conversation." Then another from Marcus Williams himself, sent through personal email. "Elena, I wanted to reach out personally. What happened to you was wrong, and it occurred under my watch. I take responsibility for allowing Derek to operate without proper oversight. While I understand you may not want to return to Neuralink, I wanted you to know that your professionalism throughout this situation has been noted by every board member. If you ever want to discuss future opportunities, my door is open." I didn't respond to either, not yet. At 11 a.m., Carl messaged me directly, "Found something you should know about." He sent a screenshot from LinkedIn. Derek's profile had been viewed 847 times in the last 24 hours. The comments under his Seeking Opportunities post were brutal. "Is this the guy who fired his lead engineer and crashed an $88 project? Due diligence tip, always check who owns the IP. This is why smart CFOs listen to their engineers." One comment, from a prominent tech CEO, was particularly cutting. "We all know an executive who confuses buzzwords with brilliance. Derek Vaughan just became the case study." Derek had become viral, but not in the way he'd hoped. Tech Twitter had picked up the story. Someone had created a meme of the "This is fine" dog labeled, "Derek firing the only person who understands the codebase." It had 12,000 retweets. By noon, Sandra called with an update. 3 other companies have reached out, asking if you'd consult on their IP frameworks. Turns out, everyone's suddenly very interested in making sure their critical engineers are properly retained. "The Elena Harper Protocol," I said, half joking. "That's literally what one CEO called it. You've become a verb. Don't get Elena Harpered is apparently making the rounds in Silicon Valley boardrooms." At 2 p.m., an unexpected email arrived. It was from the senior independent director who'd questioned Derek during the board meeting. "Ms. Harper, I've served on 15 boards over 30 years. I've seen excellent engineers marginalized by smooth-talking executives more times than I care to count. Rarely have I seen one execute such a perfect legal checkmate. Your patience and professionalism turned what could have been emotional revenge into a mathematics problem. You let Derek's own ignorance become the architect of his downfall. That takes remarkable discipline. If you ever consider board service yourself, please reach out. Companies need directors who understand both technology and strategy. Best regards, Patricia Thornton." At 3 p.m., Marissa sent one final update. "Security just finished with Derek's office. He left his coffee mug, the one that said, Chief Catalyst. Facilities put it in the break room. Someone already turned it into a pencil holder. I closed my laptop and stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city where somewhere Derek Vaughn was learning that you can't synergize your way out of a reputation collapse. The Athena migration would run successfully for years, processing billions in transactions, its decision trees quietly doing their job. Most people using the system would never know how close it came to catastrophe, or that its survival hinged on a single engineer who understood the difference between motion and progress. Derek had wanted energy. He'd wanted transformation. He'd wanted to rise like a phoenix. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, told in boardrooms and break rooms, the executive who fired the engineer holding the keys, who chose buzzwords over brilliance, who learned too late that in technology, competence is the only currency that matters. I deposited the check, updated my LinkedIn to open to opportunities, and waited for the future to arrive on my terms. 6 months later, I sat in a different coffee shop, in a different city, watching rain streak down the windows of Seattle's Capitol Hill. I'd taken the position at Tessier Systems' chief architect, equity included, and a team that actually read documentation before making decisions. The Athena migration had become a Harvard Business School case study. When intellectual property fights back, they'd even invited me to guest lecture. Though I declined, my work spoke louder than any PowerPoint presentation ever could. Carl Donovan sent occasional updates from Neuralink. They'd hired a new CFO, someone with an engineering background, who instituted a policy requiring executive sign-off on any termination of technical staff. The company culture had shifted. Slowly but measurably, fear had taught them what respect couldn't. Riley Grant, to her credit, had enrolled in a computer science program. She'd sent me a LinkedIn message. I realize now I was in way over my head. Thank you for building something so solid that even I couldn't break it. Learning to code for real this time. I never responded, but I appreciated the growth. Derek Vaughn had landed somewhere. Eventually, a startup in Miami. Something about disrupting the disruption space. His LinkedIn updates were less frequent now, the buzzwords more cautious. The internet, it turns out, has a long memory for spectacular failures. On a Thursday afternoon at 4:17 p.m., I received an unexpected call from Sandra Hartman. Remember that clause about consulting rates? She said. Neuralink wants to hire you. They're planning Athena Phase 2 and Marcus Williams specifically requested you architect it, $500 an hour, full remote. You own the IP until they pay an additional licensing fee. How much? They're offering $2 million for the IP rights up front, plus the consulting fees. I smiled, remembering Derek's words about lacking energy, about not being a builder. Tell them I'll consider it, but I want something else in the contract. What's that? A clause stating that any executive who terminates a technical contributor without documented performance reviews and board approval loses their severance package. Sandra laughed. The Elena Harper clause. Call it what you want. Just make sure it's ironclad. The rain had stopped, and weak Seattle sunshine was breaking through the clouds. My phone buzzed with a notification from the banking app my latest equity vest from Tessier had processed. The $700,000 from Neuralink had grown to $2 million through careful investment. Derek's $1,500 insult had become my seed money for financial independence. I thought about that moment in the conference room, the envelope sliding across the table, Derek's shark smile as he talked about energy and transformation. He'd been right about one thing: I wasn't a maintainer of legacy systems. I was an architect of consequences. The coffee shop was filling with the afternoon crowd, developers with their stickered laptops, startup founders practicing pitches, the whole ecosystem of tech ambition and anxiety. They all had their own Derek Vaughns to face, their own envelopes of insult to transform into opportunities. My phone rang. It was Patricia Thornton, the board director who'd reached out months ago. Elena, I'm joining the board of a biotech company that's struggling with technical leadership. They need someone who understands both the science and the strategy. Interested in your first board position. Send me the details, I said. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the Athena dashboard one last time through the monitoring access Carl had quietly maintained for me. The system was processing 43,000 transactions per second, each one following the decision trees I'd built. The logic Derek had dismissed, the architecture that had survived both attack and abandonment. In the end, Derek's 43 days at Neuralink had taught Silicon Valley a lesson worth more than any MBA program could offer: never underestimate the person who writes the code. We may work in the shadows. We may speak in languages executives don't understand, but we hold the keys to kingdoms built on logic and electricity. Derek had wanted to rise like a phoenix. Instead, he'd learned that in the world of technology, phoenixes don't rise from ashes, they rise from properly documented, legally protected, meticulously architected code. And sometimes, just sometimes, they rise from the quiet patience of an engineer who knows that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served encrypted, authenticated, and with a legally binding signature requirement. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I had another company to build, another architecture to design, another Derek Vaughan somewhere waiting to learn that energy without understanding is just noise. But this time, I'd make sure to own the IP from day one. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate justice and patient revenge. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever encountered your own Derek Vaughan in the workplace. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of brilliant minds fighting back against corporate incompetence, and share your thoughts on how you would have handled this situation. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting someone face the consequences of their own ignorance.